Everyone, open your Bibles to Luke chapter 11, verses 9 and 10. So I say to you, ask and it will be given to you. Seek and you will find. Knock and the door will be opened to you. For everyone who asks and receives, the one who seeks and finds, and to the one who knocks, the door will be opened. Let's bow our heads and pray. Just kidding. This is an atheist show. We're not going to do that here. And also, when has prayer ever helped anybody? Have people who died from disease not asked to be healed? Have victims not asked to be rescued? Has nobody asked for a stop to natural disasters? If you think prayer works, then call us because the show is starting now. Welcome to Talk Heathen. Today is Sunday, July 23rd, 2023, and I'm your host, Dr. Ben, and joining me today is Richard Gilliver. How are you today, Richard?
I'm very, very good, thank you. I'm looking forward to this immensely.
Oh, definitely. I know this month has been a lot of Richard and Ben, and we're getting to know each other pretty well, and I think we have some good on-stream chemistry, if you will. So I'm excited to be here once again. Do you have any thoughts about today's show? Anything you're looking forward to?
I'm looking forward to receiving some good evidence that God exists in reality. Whether we'll get that or not is a different thing, but that's what I'm looking forward to, and we'll see if it's forthcoming.
Absolutely. Talk Heathen is a product of the Atheist Community of Austin, a 501c3 nonprofit organization dedicated to the promotion of atheism, critical thinking, secular humanism, and the separation of religion and government. And Talk Heathen is a live call-in show, and we have open lines. So get your calls in at 512-991-9242, or you can go from your computer at tiny.cc/callth. And while people are getting their calls in, we have a couple of things that we wanted to talk about. We do have our Talk Heathen to Me segment, but Richard had a point that he wanted to talk about, and I want to give him a minute to explain what he's been thinking about this week.
Yeah, this is regarding the people who come into our comments section on YouTube after the show, and also the people who comment on our TikTok streams as well. It's kind of the same thing for both. And that's when people pop in and kind of just tell us that Jesus loves us, or that if we repent, we can go to heaven after we die, and if we don't repent, we might go to hell. And these are really, really unconvincing arguments. Just the state of stating something in a comment section is really, really poor. If you want to go for not convincing somebody that something is true, this is the ideal way to do it. Just simply stating that Jesus loves me in the comment section is not going to make me believe that God exists. It's just not. In fact, it's actually going to push me the other way, because if you do that, and my internal thinking is that you do not have a good argument to present to me. And the reason you're just putting a statement in the comment section is because you know full well yourself that you don't have a good argument, and that's why you don't want to have the conversation. That is going to push me further away. So if you genuinely believe that Jesus loves me, the way to convince me of that is not writing it in the comment section. It is calling the show. It is calling 512-991-9242 or using your computer browser at tiny.cc/callth and having the conversation right now, this evening, or this afternoon, or this morning, depending on where you are in the world, with myself and the good Dr. Ben. That's how you're going to convince us, by bringing good arguments, not simply making a statement. And I've been seeing this a lot over the last couple of weeks. And to be honest, it really gets my goat. If you want to wind me up, that is the way of doing it. Don't just put a comment telling me that Jesus loves me. Call and have the conversation. That's my little ranty bit over.
Absolutely. We are here to have those conversations, and we still have some open lines. So get your calls in. We'd love to talk to you. And we do have some comments from last week that we want to read for the segment called Talk Heathen to Me. And last week we asked you to write a slogan for Satan. And we have 3 amazing answers here. So in third place, our answer from Grace Gordon says, great slogan for Satan is "got sins," which I want to see. Maybe if this ended up on one of our fancy limited edition t-shirts, I think that would be absolutely hilarious.
Yeah, it's nice and snappy and short as well. We like that one.
Yeah, number 2 is from Belter GLJ. Their slogan for Satan is "murdered way fewer people than God," which it's funny, and also it's like funny in a very true way that you're like, yeah, it's like I'm laughing, but I also feel bad that I'm laughing at that. And number 1 from Sydney Raptor, slogan for Satan: "Worship me or go to heaven." And that's also funny in kind of a true way. What are your thoughts on those?
Yeah, I think that last one's I think it's really funny because depending on how you picture heaven, and of course different people, different believers picture it in different ways. But if you kind of take the theological representation that you're just going to be praising God for eternity, I think I'd rather be sat at the barbecue downstairs, if I'm honest, rather than doing that, because that sounds really, really tedious and boring. And forever is an exceptionally long, long time.
Mm-hmm. And kind of along with that, we have a super chat that just came in from Rosie Raid. 5 Canadian says, "Hey, Jesus loves you, but Cthulhu loves you more." And I think that's another great T-shirt line there. Thank you, Rosie, for that. And so we had multiple really amazing answers for this past week's question, and congratulations to the top 3 from last week. But we have another opportunity for you to get your answers in for the new question of the week, which is, what flyer would you not expect to see on a church bulletin board? So if you have an answer to this question, put your answer below in the comment section, not the side chat, because we're not going to see it in side chat. The comment section below after the video goes up after today's live show. And then next week, we'll reveal the top 3 answers. But I want to ask Richard, what flyer would you not expect to see on a church bulletin board?
Come to our Bible study and we will show you the bits that you don't normally get at service. Because they have a liturgical calendar, the churches that, well, mainstream churches that run over a 3-year cycle. So they essentially repeat the same teachings over a 3-year cycle. And they always seem to leave the bits out about slaughtering loads of people and taking the virgin girls as spoils of war. They never teach you that. Why don't they teach you that from the pulpit? God says, go and slaughter all these people and bring the virgin girls to me. I want my share of them. Let's take them as spoils of war. This is what I'm asking you for. Never heard that in the pulpit. So they should, I think, yeah, if we had a flyer that said, come and learn about the bits of the Bible that we don't teach you from the pulpit, that's something you are very unlikely to see, I think, on a church notice board.
Oh, definitely. It would draw a huge crowd, though.
Absolutely.
But maybe not the crowd you want, but it would definitely work. But if you all in the audience have an answer to this question, again, put it in the comments below, and we will see if you're one of the top 3 that's picked for next week. And with that, we've got quite a few calls on the line now. So I think I want to take this first one because it responds to the poll question for the week. So let's talk to Josh. Pronouns are he, him, from New York. It sounds like you want to talk about prayer is effective. What are your thoughts on that, Josh?
Yeah, so I'm a theist, specifically a Christian, and I think that prayer is incredibly effective, not just for Christians, but for all sorts of people. But I think it is incredibly effective socially, within religious context. But if there is some kind of structure out there that we can refer to as God, then it makes sense that prayer would be a part of that structure, in my opinion.
Okay, what evidence do you have that prayer is effective? Like, how are we, what metric are we using to determine whether or not it works?
That's a good question. Well, we have to talk about what it means to be effective in this case, right? Because I could pray for all sorts of things that definitely won't happen, and I know we all kind of have a concept of how that would work, right? Things that are either logically impossible or there's no chance that they're going to happen in the world that we actually live in. If we pray for that, we know the outcomes, right? So we know that prayer is not a magic solution to everything. But if what you're looking for is some kind of way to positively influence your interaction with how you define the deity called God that's in your life, or a positive interaction with people who are also members of your own religious community, then I think prayer is incredibly effective in that sense.
Well, okay, but then that's kind of begging the question for like, who, if you can pray to whatever deity you want, like, I mean, yeah, we can discuss the psychological effects or social effects. And I think maybe that's a different conversation even than is this effective for communicating with a certain deity? So like, I want to start kind of there first, because you're talking about like, if there's something out there, like if we have different perceptions or concepts of who this deity is, who or what this deity is, then if we have different concepts of this deity, and if like, would you, I guess, let me ask this question. If we all have different concepts of a deity, and let's pretend if I had something that was a deity, which I don't acknowledge that such a thing exists.
Sure.
But if we all have different versions of this and they're contradictory, like that, you're not going to have like all of them able to be true, then would some people's prayer still, like, would that impact how effective prayer is?
Sure. Well, I think so anyway. And I'll give an example of the type of system that I think, which is not related to a deity, of the type of system that I think could be like this, so that maybe you can understand my perspective. If you own a cat, and in reality, the cat, regardless of what anyone thinks, the cat is gray, and you have two people who see your cat, and one thinks it's gray and one thinks it's black, and they can't determine who's correct because we've only got the two perspectives, right? They're both seeing something else, but they're both referencing the same cat. They can both talk to that cat by going, here's a treat, I love you, right? And they're both still talking to the cat. It doesn't matter that they have different conceptions of the nature of the cat.
Right, but if each of these deities has different agendas for what they're going to, answer prayer about, like, is that going to matter? Like, if someone's praying to the Christian God versus like the Muslim God, and there's differences specifically in how you're going to pray, like the Muslim God has standards of this is how you're going to pray, and if you don't pray this way, then your prayer doesn't count. So like, what about something like that? Like if I send up a prayer that I think is to this one deity, but actually the Muslim God is the true deity, then my prayer is probably meaningless. So how then do we, number one, how do we demonstrate that this prayer is effective? And two, like, how do we know how we're supposed to pray? If like, do we need to then figure out which deity is correct in order to do that? And I just have so many questions about how we're going to get there.
That's a great question. It's clear by the way that the world actually is and how people, operate with prayer, that we don't need to figure out which deity is actually real in order to do a prayer, right? That's not a requirement.
Wait,
we can absolutely offer.
Well, sure, to offer up a prayer, you don't need to know which one is correct necessarily, but like if there's one deity that is the correct deity and you're offering prayers to the wrong one, that like, is that going to, so let's say if I did a study where I had a group of people praying and another group of people that didn't pray, like if we didn't standardize the prayer group to which deity, but then we saw similar things, like and we've seen studies about prayer done in the past that shows it basically to be like a coin flip, or even worse sometimes. Like if it still gets you the data of a coin flip and we didn't standardize for which deity was being prayed to, then how would that demonstrate that like the prayer was working, like especially if there's conflicting deities?
Yeah, well, I know the study you're talking about, and it's exactly great for the data that it wants to present. It's a great study. I think it's really impressive. What I don't think it accounts for, and probably can't be accounted for, I would guess, at least not now, is that there are ways of managing. I think this was, if you're talking about the health outcome study, I think I know the one you're talking about. I wish I could remember what was published, but there are with intercessory prayer, and there might have been even 2 or 3 studies done, but there was one major one that I know is cited often. But what I think it can't do is it can't account for the fact, it's just difficult because of the nature of the study. It can't account for the fact that there are many ways that are not just medicine, that people are necessarily going to intercede in health outcomes, right? Sometimes they're social, sometimes they're not expressly religious, but they're not necessarily medicine. Not all of them, right? And prayer,
right? But you can,
medicine, I think.
But you can account for those variables, right? That's something that you can control for, and you can expect to see this is the probability of how this is going to change my study outcomes. Like if you have a psychological factor, if you have other, like when you do a study, you're not just letting people go about their business, and like you're going to write down everything that's a potential confounder, right? Like that's what happens in these studies.
Yeah, and they do. There's lots of variables, accounted for. But the actual effectiveness of the individual variables is not. It just can't be a known quantity, right? If I took somebody who plays 8 hours of World of Warcraft at night every night because that's their jam. That's how they.
But here's the question though. Like because if we have realistic like natural factors that could improve the likelihood of prayer maybe working, like let's say maybe there is a psychological component, maybe there is a relaxation component or a social component. Like okay, wouldn't that increase the chances of the prayer group like seeming to have better outcomes? Why are we still seeing a coin flip in the data, even with these things that are potentially like significant confounders? Like, I think that doesn't demonstrate that the prayer is likely to work, or that that just shows that it's more of a coin flip without those confounders, right?
Yeah, and I mean this is I don't want to get into like too much theology. It's not the whole point of this show. So but I think that part of the kind of confounding issue here is that structures, including what humans do and how we act, and this is an opinion of mine, of course, so take it how you will, but structures, how we act, things that we do, how we interact in the name of and about God. I think that those are parts of God, so to the degree that that any healing is taking place even to the same degree that healing is taking place where there isn't a God, I think that it is properly attributed to God.
Yeah, I want to let Richard in on this, but then I do want to comment about the healing thing. Yeah, Richard, jump in.
Yeah, I want to kind of ask, we've been on this call now for just over 7 minutes, and the call screener's notes are that you think that prayer is very effective, and I've not heard anything, a single thing yet from you that demonstrates this is the case.
Stuck on this one topic. I apologize.
So I'd like, even if and you said you don't want to go into the theology, I'm fine going into the theology, but as long as you can demonstrate the thing that you're saying, because what I've heard, the thing I've heard from you so far is, there's been lots of studies done on prayer's effectiveness. None of them have shown it is actually effective, but I believe it is effective because we can't show that it's not effective. It kind of is the general gist I've got from you. And so, let's talk about why you think it is effective. What parameters are you using to show that it is actually effective, that convince you that it is effective?
Sure. Okay, that's a fair point. Yeah, I agree with you there. Okay, let me use 2 prongs here. The first is that, you can, to a degree, you can measure things like numinous or spiritual experiences, right? These are not intangible things, but they are measurable. You can measure when someone is having.
Okay, so Josh, I'm just going to quickly interrupt you. I'm going to quickly interrupt you because I've done a lot of study into such studies, and I'm very interested because having the feeling of something being spiritually significant is not necessarily a demonstration that that thing is true. And this is a very, very important point. So somebody feels that they've been affected in a positive manner by a certain spiritual practice, let's say prayer, because that's what we're talking about. That's not actually, just the feeling alone is not a demonstration that this thing has actually worked and actually been very effective through the power of God, which is essentially what we're talking about. If we're going to say prayers are effective because they make people feel good, then yes, I agree, but that doesn't in any way demonstrate that prayers are actually working when it comes to this supernatural entity.
Well, okay. Well, let's talk about that just a little bit, because I agree mostly and disagree on a small point, which is that, yes, prayers make people feel good, and no, that doesn't necessarily prove that there's some ontological being, that's called God, which is choosing to do this to somebody simply because they prayed. But if the structure of God, as I believe, consists of the actions that people take and the results that you get back when you send feedback into this system that is beyond your control, which is the social, emotional system of everything that people consider to be and represent as God, it's not something you have control over. It certainly is giving you real feedback, right? If you're having this experience. So I guess I don't know why you wouldn't consider that real.
Okay, but how are you going to differentiate between communicating with this like supernatural being versus I talked in my brain and I talked to an imaginary friend, or I talked to a pet or something, and my brain released the happy substances? Like, how do we differentiate these?
Well, I don't think that there needs to be a hard distinction here. If I talk to my pet,
yes, there does. Yes, there does. Because otherwise, you're not demonstrating that you're actually talking to God. If we cannot make that distinction, we don't know that it's God or just a normal physiological response that we're having to something which is in no way supernatural. So the kind of idea that it's a feedback, as you're saying, cannot be differentiated in that way.
Yeah, Josh.
So you've got no good reason to believe that the prayer is actually working to a supernatural entity.
I want to ask, is it possible to get feedback from something that isn't real?
What?
Like, let's say I
has presence, right?
Let's say that I do a bunch of acid and I start hallucinating really hard, and I start having a conversation with Buddha, and I wake up like a little while later, I'm like talking about this whole experience I had with Buddha, and then like my friend sitting next to me is like, no, none of that happened. You were just sitting there on the couch all day. Like, is it possible for your brain to get feedback from something that didn't happen?
Yeah, it's absolutely possible for your.
So then how do we differentiate between what was what feedback was real and what feedback wasn't? Because the thing is, like, your brain can trick itself into doing a lot of things, and you can get responses from different mechanisms in your own body working with each other, but that doesn't mean that it's gone anywhere outside of your own brain or your own body.
I know that the dialogue here is really, really common usage of words, and I don't want to nitpick, but the word "real" I think has baggage here that's undue based on the description of the situation you gave.
So you need to demonstrate. No, you need to demonstrate that there's something outside of what we have here. We have mountains and mountains and mountains of data that suggest that if you mess with the brain, you get different results, because we can go into somebody's brain and we can mess with their biochemistry. We can push on parts of their brain and have them not able to communicate between parts of their brain. We can do these things and we get measurable, objective data. So how can you demonstrate that there's something else?
This is precisely what any stimulus does, right? Any stimulus is only affecting our brain necessarily, right? The question isn't, is our brain being affected in some way? The question I think you want to know is, was there a person, Buddha, with its own will, right, external to yourself, that imposed this experience on you?
I want to know if there's any way to demonstrate that any of this experience was outside of what we know about the human brain and the human body.
You can.
How do we demonstrate that?
You can make. If you want, you can post hoc say that everything is actually a hallucination, right? You can say anything that doesn't fit in with
that's
the way that I understand.
That's not a good argument either. Like, and here's my problem with this whole argument. It's like you're avoiding having to demonstrate by just saying, oh, well, but we could just say this thing and we can't prove it false. Like Richard was saying, like, this is where your argument is going. And it's very hard to kind of continue this conversation because like you're not able to really, you're not bringing much to the table, honestly. Like it's just hypotheses, which are fine. It's fine to have a hypothesis, but we need to go somewhere after that. Like we can't just pose the question and then be like, well, I don't know why it would be false, and then just accepted it as true, right?
Well, that's of course where epistemology is going to come in, which we haven't gotten to yet. Well, and actually, I don't want to take too much time. I know you have other callers, so I apologize. But the short answer to that is, I in general, I think it's a very healthy epistemology to accept experiences that you have at face value, unless you have a good reason to reject them.
I don't think that's a good approach, because then like you're going to accept everything, and then like if you start having conflicting ideas, like is that when you start rejecting, or you're just flat out accepting everything as true before and then having to find evidence why it's false?
And Josh, this appears to be what
you're actually doing. Of course,
Josh, quickly, let me just interject this really quickly on the back of Ben's point. This appears to me to be what you're doing. It appears to me that you've got no way whatsoever to distinguish between whether this is just the brain or whether it's some God entity which exists in reality, which you're actually giving these things to and is granting these prayers. And you just appear to be saying, I have no way to distinguish, but I like the idea of this God thing, so let's go with that. And that's really, really not a good epistemological approach to defining what's possibly true in reality. And it seems this is the hurdle that I can't get over with what you're giving to us, that you don't seem to have anything which distinguishes between these two things.
Right. And I kind of want to give an example here of like, so I'm a physician, right? So I'm going to kind of frame a lot of my examples as from the perspective of a physician. So let's say I've got a person coming in to see me, and they have like a non-specific complaint of fatigue. Let's throw that out, because I'm sure even lay people can think of a few hundred things that could cause you to be fatigued, right? Like you could have anemia, you could have thyroid disease, you could have a B12 deficiency, you're just not sleeping well at night, you could have depression, like so many things, right? But like with your framework, if we're accepting all things to be like true and then just rejecting things as they conflict, I have to, my differential list is going to be way too broad, and I'm not going to be able to get anywhere. Like if I assume, like, let's take just a couple of the examples. So if we have somebody with like depression or anemia, which are very common conditions, like those, all the things I just listed are kind of very common differentials that I could probably tease out first and then move on to something else. But like if I said, well, I can't prove that it isn't this extremely rare genetic defect where you can't process fructose. Like, okay, yeah, it's a possibility. It's a hypothesis I can have. But like, am I going to jump straight to that? Or am I going to go to something that is more likely the case? Like we can get there down the road. And there's even a few things I can think of right off the bat why this would not be an appropriate diagnosis, depending on the age of the patient. Because usually like fructose metabolic disorders are diagnosed in childhood because they can be fatal. But like, if I were to accept every single disease process as true, and then just have to rule out all of them first, that seems like a very kind of inefficient and almost problematic way of looking at it. Because like if I just assume somebody has cancer right away, it's like, am I going to give them chemo until I can prove that it's not cancer? Like there's always like a non-0% chance that any one of us could have cancer, right? So should we all get prophylactic chemo just in case we all have cancer? Like, no, that's, I think we'd all agree that that's irresponsible. Like we need to take things reasonably. And if we have reasonable suspicion for cancer, then we're going to go down that road. But like, do you kind of see where this thought process, like it seems nice to think about it this way, but if you start that way, it can lead to some significant problems.
I do understand the point you're making. I believe, phone call, so it's hard to say for sure that I've got everything, but I think that yourself and, I'm sorry, was it Craig? I apologize. I'm not looking at the screen.
Richard.
I don't ever.
Just call him. His name is Craig now. Your name is now Craig.
That's fine.
Okay. Hi, Craig. Okay, so I think I believe you've both made an error. You with your analogy, which was a good analogy. It was very appropriate because in medicine specifically, right, as a physician, you know the risks, right, of starting treatments for things that you can check to see data through various test results to see if someone has, right? And some things even you can't test for, right? Sometimes you do have to make a diagnosis based on symptoms presented and hope that the treatment works. I'm sure that's rare, but it happens, is my understanding, in medicine. So, like, you're presenting a situation where the reason why you wouldn't make a presumption and act on it is, one, because the outcomes are inherently dangerous, right? So you already have that in your mind, that giving someone medicine for something they don't have is dangerous. That's how that operates. They might die.
But there is error. There is danger. There is danger in assuming that something works when you don't know if it does. Like for prayer, there is danger there, because I see people frequently who say that they don't want medical treatment because prayer works for them. And they die. Like, these people die because they go without the treatment that is verified to help them. Right? So there is, right. Even if prayer seems benign, it's like, what are you losing in accepting this? Like, nothing, and of course, like, nothing is risk-free, but even something that seems benign might not be as benign as you think it is.
Sure. But just like with medicine, why I think it's a very apt, there are benign treatments, right? I mean, most of them are not if you don't actually have the disease, but there certainly are. I could have my appendix removed.
But not necessarily even the treatment, but think about the absence of a treatment is not benign. Right?
That's
like,
true.
If somebody has a condition that needs to be treated, if you need a treatment and you don't get it, like, that's not benign. And so, like, that's why I'm so hesitant to just believe something without evidence, because it does lead to this kind of damage. And, like, that's why I want my thought process to be as accurate and get to the truth, like, as best as possible. Because even if, like, some beliefs might not be super problematic, like, if you're using that same framework to think about other problems, that is damaging. And if you're telling other people to have this thought process, that could impact them more severely than it might for you or somebody else.
There's all kinds of useful frameworks that can be damaging when applied to the wrong problems, right? I mean, I agree with you.
So then shouldn't we make an effort to make sure we're using the correct framework then? Like, that should be the priority, right?
Yeah. Yeah, if you and it will always take priority, I think, at least it should. If you're a religious person, any religious person, I don't really care what religion, you don't forego your social responsibility to other people because you hold a belief. So I would never advise someone, and I think it would be wrong to advise someone to pray instead of seek medical help. You still have a social responsibility to other people outside of your own religious beliefs, obviously, and I would never suggest otherwise. But the notion that because in the worst cases you could use prayer to kill someone, or you could use the concept of prayer to have someone, be killed or die accidentally, I don't think that indicates that there's something wrong inherently within the way that people understand prayer to work and how they use it.
So, but wouldn't you, like, that all sounded great, but it's kind of inconsistent with how you've been arguing for the past few minutes, because, like, wouldn't you then want to demonstrate if prayer works at all? Like, wouldn't you want to have that demonstration and that justification? Because previously it sounded like you didn't really care to know whether you could justify it or not.
No, I definitely care. I just think that the justification is probably broader than the way that a lot of people are using it, which is fine. Nobody's obligated to like accept my epistemology, but I think it's quite broad. It's not that I don't care. I just think there's broader forms of justification than the ways that a lot of modern empiricalists use. But even if we just keep it to empiricism, right, then there's definitely ways that we can show that prayer doesn't work, and it's perfectly acceptable to simply limit the notion, right? I don't see any reason why we can't say, well, we know that prayer isn't going to end starvation in Africa, right? So, because we've been trying. So, you know, we can say that with confidence. And that's fine. I don't have a problem with that.
How do you react to the kind of the idea that this is that prayer not working when people ask for things is a kind of inconsistent with what's said in the Bible? Because you know, it was said in the Bible that if two of you gather in my name, two or more of you gather in my name and pray, I will grant the thing you pray for.
Yeah, it's definitely an inconsistency with the Bible, but let's be upfront. The Bible says all sorts of things that we know not to be true anymore, right? I mean, we're not gonna use the Bible as our perfect moral guideline. You aren't, I'm not, right? I know some people are. I think they've made an error, but you know.
Which part of this is going kind of off track? We might have to call back and have this conversation another time. But just in the meantime, just to give you something to think about, and you know, don't answer it, but have to think about it. Which, if you are you're a Christian believer, as you say you are, and I assume you think the Bible has some authority at least, how do you decide which parts to kind of take as authoritative and which parts to dismiss? But leave that for now. Have a think about that. Give us a call back and we'll have that conversation separately.
Sounds fun.
No, I'd be happy to talk with you again, though. I know, like, this got a little bit, I don't think it got too heated, but we got a little raised. I know my voice was coming up in volume a little bit, but I did really enjoy this conversation, and I would love to have more conversations with you in the future, Josh. I think this was productive. So
yeah, I do as well. I appreciate it, Josh.
Yeah, definitely call back in.
Thank you. You too, Josh.
That was a good call.
It was. It's a nice guy. I think for me, it was just, and I said I'm not talking out of turn, but now he's gone. And I said it several times during the call. I think there's just an inconsistency there, and it's kind of taking this leap of faith that he's doing and not having good reason to actually believe what he believes about prayer in particular. That's the bit I'm stuck on, and I think it shows a kind of poor replication of epistemology doing that.
Well, I can offer you, and well, maybe not you, because you're all the way over across the water, but I can offer something to the people here in that you don't have to pray to meet your favorite hosts from the ACA, except for I know I won't be there. But if you've been praying to meet some of your favorite hosts from the ACA, you can go to the annual Bat Cruise on Saturday, August 26, 2023. Join the ACA for a fun summer evening on the water, conversing with like-minded free thinkers, and you can meet Forrest Valkai, J. Mike, and other hosts of the Atheist Experience, Talk Heathen, and the Nonprofits. They'll be on board to mingle and chat throughout the 2-hour cruise around Lady Bird Lake. The cruise will pause at Congress Avenue Bridge at sundown for the emergence of the world's largest urban bat colony. And get your tickets now, because you can't just pray for the tickets to be magically given to you. You have to go and purchase them at tiny.cc/batcruise, and that's how you can get involved in that. There are also some ways that you can support Talk Heathen and the ACA. You can get our new limited edition t-shirt that right now says science, because the answer never turned out to be magic ever. So if you want to get this one before it goes away forever, visit tiny.cc/merchaca to get them right now. You can also like the video and subscribe to the channel, enable notifications, and comment below on your favorite caller. You can become a channel member by clicking the join button below the video, where you can get custom chat emotes, and you'll help perpetuate the mission of Talk Heathen and the ACA. You can also, as we saw earlier, you can send super chats with a question or a comment if you want to have a short conversation, have a question answered, or have a comment that you want to mention, but don't want to call into the show. You can submit a super chat and we will answer those on the air. We'll read as many of those as we can. So many different ways to help us out. And I hope next year, I hope I can go to the Bat Cruise. I went last year. It was a great time. I recommend it for everybody that can make it. But it should be a really good one this year. And with that being said, let's move on to... Are you ready, Richard? Are you ready for this?
Are you ready for this? Yeah, I'm ready for this.
Are you ready? The audience doesn't know what we're getting ready for. But we're going to talk to Emmanuel, him from Texas, who wants to talk about atheism being an immoral ideology. Tell us more about that, Emmanuel. What is your argument?
What are you guys?
Hello?
Hello? Can you hear me?
Yes, I can
yes,
hear you.
Yes, we can hear
yep.
Emmanuel.
Oh, yeah. Well, a lot of times I've tried to call in the transatlantic show, but Jimmy Snow has banned me, so I'm not sure if I could call again. But my basic idea is in the atheism ideology, since there is no deity, how do you come up with, ethical values? Because I feel like in the atheism ideology, we don't have an ultimate purpose, which is
how do you come up with them in your theistic ideology?
Well, in the theistic, for example, if you go to the specific theistic ideology that I follow, I believe that deep in our hearts there's a law written by God, so we know what things are wrong or what things are true. But if there is no deity, I define atheism as a lack of belief in a deity. That's how I think.
Do people in
different definition?
Do people, Emmanuel, do people in your theistic ideology have different opinions of what that moral system entails?
Well, we're very dogmatic. Like the denomination that I'm affiliated with is very dogmatic. So I don't think there's a basic difference between I and someone who.
But you've just said something very, very interesting there, Emmanuel. You've just said in your denomination, which suggests that there are other denominations under that theistic system that you belong to. Are there other denominations which have different opinions?
Yeah, I mean, there are, I'm Pentecostal, and there are Pentecostal which are, for example, I consider myself as a progressive Calvinistic Pentecostal. Most Pentecostals have Arminian view. They believe that we have free will. Well, I don't believe there is free will. So there's
then why are you calling us? If there's no free will, if there's no free will, then do you think that your words are going to make any difference to us?
Well, in the for example, I believe that the word has to be taught and preached. The fullness of the gospel has to be preached, even to the people who are elected. So.
So even Emmanuel, even within your own theistic system, there are people who have different opinions on what ethical guidelines or ethical or moral values are. So how is it that you can say that on one hand, and on the other hand say that God has written this on everybody's hearts? Surely this isn't the case. This is demonstrated by the fact that even other people who follow your own religion don't agree with you on those moral systems.
It's just that the way we interpret, we use the same tool. We both believe in Scripture is the ultimate authority, and it's the Word of God. We believe in the Apostles' doctrine. But the thing is, we interpret those doctrines very differently. For example, I believe that unless your heart is regenerated, it's impossible for you to have salvation.
So, Emmanuel, how do I know yours is correct?
Well, all you have to do is just study the New Testament and find out that.
But I did study. But I did study the New Testament, and I mean, first of all, I wasn't Pentecostal. I was probably non-denominational evangelical.
I was not Pentecostal either. I was Mennonite.
And then now I read more of the New Testament and I became an atheist. So I studied it pretty intensely, and it was in a lot of the reading that I kind of learned, hey, I don't have any good reason to believe that my view on this is correct. And going back to needing a deity or needing religion to be a moral person. Like, again, like if we have different religions, even going beyond different denominations, different religions with different views on what is moral, then does having a deity mean that you're going to be moral if they're all different, right?
Well, we are all immoral and wicked, even if we believe in God or not. We are immoral from birth. So I do recognize that even though you believe in God, it's just a process till you die and, you meet the Lord Jesus and have a glorified
But
body.
how?
Until then, okay, I'm sorry.
But how? So, like, if I have you, who's a Pentecostal Christian, and I have a Muslim, we're using this example a lot today, and both of you believe that you're doing the thing that is the most moral and more ethical, how do I know which one of you is right?
Just compare what I say and what that guy say, and you'll see that my epistemology and doctrine and thoughts are more consistent with the apostle teaching than.
Well, but I don't care. You're just going back to more consistent with the apostle's teaching doesn't make that more true than what the Muslim said. Like, because the Muslim's going to say, well, yeah, but what I'm saying is more consistent with what Muhammad said. So, right? Because they're just going to go back to, you just went back to your own book. But how do I know which one of your books is telling me the truth about what is moral?
Oh, okay. Can I just throw this out there? So Muslims does not believe that God could be manifested in the flesh. So that doesn't matter for what the point is. The point is, I have two people in front of me that say that their system is the most moral and the most ethical, and that you cannot be moral unless you have their system. How do I know that you're right and the Muslim is not? Well, I didn't grow up in America, so I know Islam. People who teach Islam, it was like more than 40% of my country's population is Islam. You could tell that it's ancient mythology. It doesn't have any bearing truth or fact.
Yeah, I think but I say the same thing about your religion. Your religion is also an ancient mythology that doesn't have a lot of truth to it. So you can't just go back to that argument. You have to tell me, why is yours true? Bring evidence to me that says this one is true because reason. Right? And even if you disproved every other religion on earth, that does not make yours true. Like, you have to still bring your arguments to the table of why is yours correct.
Emmanuel, do you think that this internal knowledge we have about what is morally right and wrong, do you think that is consistent with what God instructs people to do and does himself in the Bible?
Well, I don't think it is consistent because we are born in a wicked world, so our heart and mind is corrupted. That's why.
But I'm not talking about the corruption. I'm talking about the statement you made at the start of the call, that we all intrinsically have that knowledge of what is right and wrong within us, whether we act on it or not. Do you think that intrinsic knowledge that of good and bad are consistent with what God instructs and does himself in the Bible?
Very much so, because even though we can't act upon those moral values, we still know what is right or wrong. And that's
so. Would you suggest then, based on that? I'm sorry for interrupting you. I just want to make a follow-up point. Okay. Would you suggest that God commanding to go and slaughter a whole people, men, women, and children, apart from the virgin girls, who we should keep as spoils of war and take our share of, do you think that is a morally good thing to do?
No, I don't think that's an ethical thing to do. I think that the scriptures have different commandments.
So in fact, when I previously asked you, Emmanuel, if you thought that internal goodness and badness was consistent with God's actions and instructions, you don't actually think that, because you've just told me that that's now not moral.
What I'm saying is for human to make judgment upon other people, I think those ideas are only found in the Old Covenant, which doesn't apply to the New Covenant church.
But was that the same
changes over time? Sorry, Ben.
Oh, I was just gonna say that, like, so, but that's the same God, right? It's the same deity that did that.
No. It's the same, but I could be the same person and give you different instruction at different times. I could give you different agreements with you.
So you're saying that it was okay. So you're saying it was okay that God did that in the Old Testament.
Like, you have to give me a specific. Are you talking about 1 Samuel?
No, I'm talking about
the specifics.
31. I'm talking about Numbers 31, where God specifically.
Okay, number 31 is a slavery law where they keep the virgin girls. Basically, when the Israelites
Numbers 31 is the example where God commands Moses.
But they still kept a certain people, right? Which means they basically made them slaves, right?
They committed genocide of a people and kept slaves. They did both of those things.
They kept slaves. So.
And they committed. You're glossing over the genocide part. They committed genocide.
Yeah. Do you know what God's reason was for sending people to slaughter those people?
Absolutely, because they were idol worshippers, right?
So, okay, so hold on. So Emmanuel. Okay, so this is the argument that you just said. Okay, and let me ask you this very clearly. Do you think people who worship idols deserve to be slaughtered?
Actually, we all deserve to be slaughtered, including people who worship idols. That's why God had to kill everyone in the flesh story, right? We all deserve that.
So you just said it is okay to commit genocide against people who worship idols.
I did not say
that's what God did. That is specifically the story, though. God commanded his people to go commit genocide against people who worship idols. Is that not the story?
Well, that's the story, but I'm not God. It was like
right. But do you think? But do you believe? Hold on. Let me walk you through this. Because it seems like you're not understanding the argument that you're agreeing with. Okay, so you said that it is okay for God to command these people to kill idol worshipers. And you also said that this God is the same God that you worship. This is the same God from the Old Testament and the New Testament. So is God moral? Is God ethical for telling people to commit genocide?
Genocide is never okay, by the way. I'm not saying genocide.
Okay, so genocide's never okay. Okay, so then why was it okay that God did it?
Because before Christ's sacrifice, we all were under the law, which we are deserving of death. So that's why you see in Leviticus.
Do you not see how your argument is
irrelevant?
Your argument is totally inconsistent, because on the one hand, you said genocide is never okay. And then you said, well, it's okay in these circumstances. So you have admitted that you think genocide is okay under certain circumstances.
No. I'm not saying.
So it wasn't okay that God commanded the Israelites to kill people. Which is it? Is genocide okay or is it not okay, Emmanuel? You have to pick one. You cannot be in both camps here.
Let me just paraphrase what Ben is asking you. Is God good, or is he a very, very naughty boy? That's what we're asking you.
Okay, let me say it's not okay, right? It's not okay.
Okay. So then why was it okay? So you said it's not okay. So in saying that, you would have to then, if you're consistent in your argument, you'd have to say that what God did in the Old Testament was wrong. You'd have to say that.
No, because here's.
So you think genocide is okay under certain circumstances? You think genocide is okay?
No.
Do you not see? You're contradicting yourself, and I don't think we're getting anywhere with you.
Emmanuel, let us remind ourselves that the reason we're going down this route is you said our internal knowledge of good and right that comes from God is consistent with God's actions and instructions in the Old Testament, in the Bible. That's why we're going down this route. So you specifically made the claim that our internal knowledge of right and wrong is consistent with God's instructions and actions. God's instructions in the Old Testament are that people should go out and slaughter people for idol worship and keep the virgin girls of those people for themselves. They are his instructions. So, based on your own argument, you are telling us that our internal knowledge of right and wrong says that this is the correct thing to do. It is a right thing to do. If somebody worships idols, it is absolutely fine to go out and slaughter that whole people and take their virgin daughters as sex slaves. Okay. That is literally the argument you're making.
No, because first of all, even though there are different people who have different religious views, I would not even verbally abuse those people, let alone commit genocide, right? So what I am saying is we have to understand that under the Christian model, all of us before Christ was dead on the cross, we all were worthy of death, right? So that's why you see a specific.
This is irrelevant to the conversation we are having.
Emmanuel. Like, here's the problem, though. Okay. Like we've just explained in this whole argument we've gone down is part of the reasoning why I don't accept the Christian model. So, I mean, you can say all you want about under the Christian model, like this is the case, but I don't accept that model for reasons that we just mentioned. The model is inconsistent. The Christian model is terrible. And so that's what we're trying to say is like, we don't accept that. So don't use the framework of the Christian model to say why we need to just let this part slide, because we don't accept your model.
Okay, so under the law of Moses, someone who commits adultery will be stoned to death, right?
This is nothing. The example, Emmanuel, the Emmanuel gave had nothing to do with the old laws. It was a specific instruction by God separate from those laws. It has nothing to do with the old laws. It has nothing to do with the new covenant coming along and changing those laws. It is a specific example of God giving an instruction separate to those laws. And this is why it's so important. When I asked you originally if you thought our internal model was consistent with God's actions and instructions, it's nothing to do with the old laws. It's nothing to do with the new covenant made by Jesus. God did this. If our internal model is consistent with God, then we should think this is correct. And your original question to us, which we kind of went off, is that, let me have a look, is atheism is an immoral ideology. Now, within it, atheism doesn't have a selected ideology for morals throughout the thing, because it doesn't relate to that. It's merely a response to a single question. However, if we look at a collective group of atheists, I'm almost certain that we would agree that going out and slaughtering a whole people for idol worship and taking their virgin daughters as spoils of war is an immoral thing to do. This makes collective atheist morality better than the Christian one that you are following. I rest my case. I'm going to let you go.
Yep. Yeah,
and we are going to move on.
All right. that was a lot. And we're going to be getting into some more of those arguments later on today. Like I'm seeing calls coming in about that. I did miss some super chats that came in a bit earlier, so I want to read those out. We have one from Tons of Mice, who I see Tons of Mice a lot of places on the internet, and he gives $5 and says, today is Stool's birthday. He really wants a goat. And that's some context, kind of more outside of Talk Heathen, but that's more related to my content. So if y'all want more of that, you can find me in probably on Twitter is where all that's going to go down if you're really curious. Ben9 gives $4.99 and there's no comment there. And we have our top 5 patrons of the week, which we're going to read out, which if you want to get on the list of the top 5 patrons of the week, you can go to the Patreon and get on that list. And this list is updated every single week, and we read out the names. Richard, would you like to read out the top 5 this week?
See, this is, I don't like this bit because I want to be in that chair and putting you on the spot. yeah, go on then, I'll do it. Number 1, Dinglebridge accent. Number 2, Ayame. Number 3, oops, all singularity. Number 4, Devote Valgin. And number 5, Kaleve Helvete. And an honourable mention this week goes to Apex Herbivore. Thank you all very much for your patronage.
I love that. I love that last one. And if you want to get on that list, you can go to tiny.cc/PatreonTH to become one of the top 5 patrons of the week next week. We also have a channel that houses all of the shows of the ACA in audio podcast form, and you can visit tiny.cc/AEN podcasts. You can also become part of the Talk Heathen community in our fan-run Facebook page at tiny.cc/FBTHG. And in case you didn't know, Talk Heathen has a TikTok where you can find Richard a lot of the time. And we're going there live before the shows on Sundays. So go subscribe and join the pre-show on the Talk Heathen TikTok where you can find Richard and say hi before the shows. We also want you to know what's going on in our community. And for that, we've got an updated website. And you can go to www.atheist-community.org, where you can learn about the organization itself, its policies, and how you can get more involved. And also along with that, if you want to talk with us, if you want to ask some questions, share some comments, but you want to do that in more of a private setting, we want to hear from you. And we want to know what you liked, what you didn't like, and kind of any thoughts that you have for future shows. You can email us at tv@atheist-community.org and let us know what you think. And I think we had a call. I think they dropped. I was going to take one. But let's take Martin, him from the UK. It sounds like you want to talk about the resurrection of Jesus. What you got for us?
Well, the evidence, I've got it in a book here. I did try and memorize the information. The first evidence that after his crucifixion, Jesus was buried by Joseph of Arimathea in a tomb. So the member of the Jewish Sanhedrin who condemned Jesus. Now, the reason why people take this as fact is that Jesus' burial is attested in the very old information, ca. Less than AD 36, which was handed on by St. Paul in his first letter to the Church of Corinth, Greece. Excuse me. And the burial story is independently attested in the very old source material used by Mark in writing his Gospel. And given that there was hostility between the Sanhedrin and the Christian authorities at the time, it's unlikely that would have been invented. So that's the argument there, the first one. The second one, the fact that he was found is very... The fact that he wasn't found...
Let's just stay with the first. Let's just stay with the first one before we go on. Okay. Martin. So, two ancient sources claim that a thing happened.
Yes.
Why is this evidence that this thing happened?
Well, I would say that it's just analysed historically. We're not taking it as inerrant, I should say. It's not taken as infallible. It's just a handful of documents passed on from the 1st and 2nd centuries. So, I don't know.
So when was Mark written?
I don't know. I mean, G Mark is the earliest, I believe, or the Q source, rather. And that was written about... We don't have the
Q source. We don't have the Q source.
No, that's quite true. But it is derived from, I think, parts that were believed to be Q, which is about 36 AD.
When was Mark written? We don't have the Q source. We don't have the Q source. We have Mark.
To be fair...
When was Mark written?
We definitely... I don't know.
Mark was written around 70 AD, so that's a good 40 years after the resurrection event. So Mark wasn't...
I would technically disagree with that. I would say that the scholars I've heard of say that it occurred it was written around maybe 3 years or so after Jesus' death.
The consensus of scholarship, the consensus of scholars in the field, think it was written around 70 AD. Yeah, other scholars might disagree, but I'm a bit dubious when you say scholars here. I'm going to can you name names, because I suspect you might be referring to apologists, which are not scholars, and I will go, or they might be scholars, but they are biased scholars, and I'll go into that distinction if you want me to, but can you name names?
Would you, yeah, I would, John A.T. Robinson of Cambridge University.
Okay. And what's he saying?
Well, he said that it's one of the earliest and best attested facts about Jesus, that he was buried by Joseph of Arimathea.
What's he saying about Mark?
Oh, I see. I'm sorry. I don't know. I don't have that information.
But that's the question I asked you about. You know, you said some people disagree that Mark was written about 70 and put it about 3 years after the resurrection. Which scholars are putting Mark's gospel?
Yeah, I would say that the information in Paul is also worth noting, and that probably,
we're not talking about Paul, we're talking about Mark. Which scholars are putting Mark's gospel at 3 years after the resurrection?
I admit I don't know, but the sites I've seen suggest it was written in 50 AD, which is obviously a little after the events.
Okay, that's still 20 years after the event, but I'm kind of interested in this fact that, you know, you've already just changed your mind on something. Pretty into the conversation. So what is it that kind of, you know, where you're going? How are you assessing this information? Because if already you've called in to present evidence for the resurrection, and already within a couple of minutes of the conversation, you're saying, well, actually, I might be wrong on that particular point. So how are you actually assessing this information? What yardstick are you using to kind of assess it by?
I would say there are sort of 6 criteria you might use to justify sort of historical descriptions. And those would be explanatory scope, explanatory power, degree of plausibility, ad hocness, things like that, you know? That would be my basic.
Where it sounds to me like you're reading this from somewhere, and this is not kind of something you would personally use to assess a historical claim.
Yes, that's true. I'm reading. I have read a book called A Debate Between a Christian and an Atheist, which was written by William Lane Craig and Walter Synod Armstrong.
That's where we're going wrong, sir.
Yeah,
that is where we're going wrong. And you know, earlier when I made the statement that apologists are different to scholars, here's why.
Yes.
You get people like William Lane Craig, who they assess what happened based on the conclusion that they want to make. So regardless of what counter information comes along, as I said, the consensus of scholarship says that Mark was written in 70 AD. Now, someone like William Lane Craig, who is an apologist, a professional apologist, will dismiss that scholarship simply on the basis that it doesn't agree with his conclusion. That is not scholarship.
No, you're quite right. I agree.
That is a really poor methodology to use.
I agree that he doesn't, but I would say that he does regard these arguments as sufficient conditions, but not necessary conditions for belief. I mean, I've heard him say that.
Okay, I've heard him say many things. I've heard him say that the Kalam cosmological argument is the best argument he has ever heard, until somebody presents with the reason that it's not actually very good, and then he's said directly, "Oh yes, that's why I've changed. I've since changed my opinion on the Kalam cosmological argument." And the next time anybody speaks to him about the Kalam cosmological argument, he says, "The Kalam cosmological argument is the best argument I have ever heard." He's dishonest. The man is dishonest, and this is easily demonstrable. So, but let's stop talking about William Lane Craig and kind of get back to the evidence point of view. Ben, you want to jump in?
Well, I just wanted to jump in and like what Richard was saying about like it seems like you and William Lane Craig does this a lot too. Like you start with the conclusion, like if you start with the resurrection happened, and then you just do enough studying on things that could potentially be evidence for the resurrection, like we're already having a problem in how we're thinking about it. Because what we should do is we should start at, I don't know if this thing happened or not. Let's look at studying it to see if there's evidence to suggest that it's true. Not starting with, oh, I want this to be true, so let me look for evidence that justifies why this is true. Do you see how the thought process is different? Like, and this is something I'm willing to go with you, and I think Richard is too. If we started from a neutral ground of saying, I don't know if this thing is true or not, let's see what's out there. Like, I'm happy to go with you on that, but we need to start there. Are you willing to start there and then kind of help us like understand where you're coming from with what evidence you think would convince somebody that has no knowledge of the subject?
Sure.
What you got?
Well, I mean, the second piece of evidence I was thinking of is the fact that Jesus' tomb was found empty. So this is tested sort of multiple times. It's transmitted.
Well, okay, but couldn't a tomb be found empty for a variety of reasons? Like, okay, let's reverse this a little bit. Just if I gave you an example of something that like may or may not have happened, like for example, if I said I went on a run yesterday and I saw a wolf that like jumped out of the bushes and then like tried to attack me, and then I wrestled this wolf and like I have like these scratches now and like this black eye. But yeah, obviously this happened because of the wolf thing. Like, you don't know anything about that happening, right? I'd have to convince you a little bit that that was actually the thing that happened and not just what I'm saying happened. Like, yeah, it could be a possible explanation, but what are some other explanations that might have happened? Oh yeah, I might have gotten lost on the trail and I ended up in some bushes and then I like ran into a tree with my face and like, I didn't want to sound stupid. So I came up with this other wolf story because I thought it'd make me look cooler, right? But like, so pretend like I'm a bystander, like just listening to the story. Like if you're coming up to me and you're telling me this cool story about this resurrection of Jesus, and I know nothing about the story, like I would reasonably be a little bit skeptical, right? Like, and you say, oh yeah, well, obviously Jesus rose from the dead because the tomb is empty now. And like, okay, but does the tomb being empty mean that the resurrection happened? Like, what other things could have caused that? Like, could somebody have moved a body? Was there even a body? Was Jesus as a person? Like, did this, like, there's so many arguments that you could take this, like where do I go with it? So we have the, and I can't even say this is objective, but let me grant you this really quickly. I'm not necessarily agreeing to this long-term, but like, let's just say hypothetically that there was a tomb and it was empty. What does that mean? What's the significance about the tomb being empty? Like, what does that specifically prove?
Well, you're quite right that anything that looks miraculous could be wrong, could be not be ambiguous. I mean, it also could be the case that someone had just, there are other explanations. You're quite right.
Right. So if it is not, so if that particular piece of evidence does nothing to prove the point, why is that evidence? Why are you using that as evidence?
I would say that it's a good explanation if you already believe in God. You know, you need to believe in something.
Right. So if you started with the conclusion, it's evidence because you already had that conclusion. But if I don't have that conclusion, that's not convincing to me, right? Like, we need to start from like ground zero first and then add evidence. Like that's what Richard and I are asking for here. Is we're asking for specific pieces of information that actually boost the case. Like, you have to demonstrate that there is a relationship between this data and this claim, and that there is a relation, and that relation would not exist without that particular piece of evidence. Like, I have to see demonstration of that. Do you have anything like that for this claim?
Well, not on this particular claim. There are other evidences you might want to take into consideration. But
Okay, so
things like,
so give us that evidence, but you have to demonstrate that it is evidence. Like, because when we say, it's not just this is related to like when we say evidence, like evidence carries some weight. Like, and if it's going to carry weight, it needs to meet those criteria that I just mentioned for it to be able to carry that weight.
And it has to be demonstrable to those who don't believe as well as those that do. It's not evidence if it only convinces those people who already believe the claim.
In that case, the fine-tuning of the universe.
How does that demonstrate the resurrection?
Well, it doesn't. It would show that something powerful created the universe.
That's not related at all to the resurrection, and it's also not evidence for what I think you're thinking it is. But how about, like, it sounds like you're running out of arguments for the resurrection. Well, would it be safe to say that you don't have evidence for the resurrection? Is that where we're getting at here?
Well, I'd say that you need to assess the evidence by the standards of historicity.
What evidence?
Sort of mentioned.
That's what we're trying to do, but we've not presented any evidence yet to assess.
Okay, I guess from the scholars I've heard of, like Gerd Luderbahn, they seem to think that there is evidence that the disciples saw Jesus alive.
I assume you are convinced that the resurrection happened, and correct me if I'm wrong.
Well, I guess I'm playing a little bit of devil's advocate. I don't entirely believe it's all real, but I believe they had a strong experience of something.
Which is a totally different claim than the resurrection happening.
Yeah.
It's true, it could be. But
it's a totally different claim, because I'm the burden of proof needed to prove that somebody had an experience that they thought somebody resurrected is way more plausible than somebody actually resurrected, right? Like it wouldn't take much to convince me that somebody thought something, because people can think a lot of things that may or may not be true. So which is your argument? Because if it's that they had an experience, I don't know if I'm going to push back too much on that, because like I don't really have a reason to. It doesn't really impact me at all if they had an experience or not.
Well, I guess then surprisingly we agree. It's a very cordial disagreement.
I mean, it's. I hope you don't mind me saying, Martin, but you came from the Atheist Experience fan group, debate group.
Yes, I did.
Where you kind of made these claims on there as well, and I asked you to call into the show. And thank you for calling in. I appreciate that. It's I do enjoy it when people call from me. No, and I do appreciate you calling in. But the conversation we're having on here seems to differ remarkably from the claims you were making in the group. You were seeming to suggest in the group that these things are actually evidence of these things happening.
Well, I believe I am an atheist, but I do think that there are arguments that are not tested out enough, and I was trying to test them out. I mean, it's kind of a compliment to your show. I did declare myself an atheist when I called in. It's very kind of you to talk to me.
Yeah, no, I appreciate it. I appreciate the call as well, Martin. We'll let you go. Thank you for calling in. I do appreciate the call. And I love it when people call, whether it's from the TikTok or the fan group, the Facebook groups. I love it when people do say they're going to call in and do call in.
And there's... Yeah, no, I'm very happy. I'm very happy that this person called in. And if you want to have more discussions like that, you can, like I mentioned earlier, go to those Facebook groups and continue to have those discussions. It's a great time over there. And the good news as well is that if you wanted to call in today, but didn't, there's always other shows that you can call into. And next week, it's going to be live from Austin at the Free Thought Library next week on July 30th, 2023. You can join us for the live broadcast of Talk Heathen and AXP. Talk Heathen will be hosted by Jamie Boone and Jamie the Blind Limey. It is Jamie squared for Talk Heathen. And the Atheist Experience will be hosted by Christy Powell and Objectively Dan. Doors open at noon, and we hope to see you all there. We have 2 more calls left, and I think we're going to try to take both of them. We do have a theist on the line. Connor, pronouns are he, him, from Texas. And it sounds like you want to talk about the atheist perspective when dealing with someone who thinks their ideas are superior. Can you clarify a little bit what you mean by this?
Okay, so first, it's more about a kind of a light verbal altercation I had at work.
Okay.
And so the background for both myself and my boss. So I was raised a Christian, and I converted to a different faith, and my boss just straight up Christian. So it kind of started, I was really just calling in to just get y'all's perspective on this, because it sounds like an atheist perspective would have more experience with this kind of stuff. So it started last week with the other week. This delivery driver who the company supplies us with stuff started asking me about religious views and all that. And, you know, I'm just trying to be nice and like just give him straight up answers. And when it gets to the point when the delivery driver asks me why I converted to a different faith, I give my reason. I give my explanation. But then my boss out of nowhere comes up with like, it sounds more like you did it for these other reasons instead, which were completely different from what I actually said. And then, so that's just the start of it. And then it kind of came to a boiling point ahead just in the middle of this last work week, where we kind of just started like going at each other. And it got to the point where I just asked him if he thinks, I tried to talk to him about like, there's so little lack of evidence for both of our beliefs, and yet for some reason he's trying to make the claim that his views are automatically superior and right compared to mine, and I'm just inherently wrong. And it's just I'm kind of rambling here, so and you just let me get a moment to collect myself. But any thoughts y'all have on this so far?
Richard, do you have any thoughts?
Yeah, it's not a good idea to argue with your boss at work.
Yeah.
That's an immediate thing that springs out. Look, people, I mean, I don't know. I'm not entirely sure what. Did you convert to a religion from a different religion?
Yes.
Yeah. So are you comfortable sharing what the religion you converted to is?
So I went from Christian to Baha'i.
Right. Okay.
Okay.
So this and the delivery driver is he a Christian?
Yes.
Yeah. So it kind of you've already got a point there, I think, where you know, and you said your boss is atheist.
No, Christian.
No, your boss is Christian as well, right? Yeah. So
yeah.
You know, you said something very interesting. You said something very interesting, Connor, when you said that.
Oh, okay.
When you said that, you know, kind of none of us have good reasons for believing what we do, but they were kind of coming down on the superiority table. Yeah. So, you know, you are in a difficult situation here when you've kind of gone from the mainstream religion to a different religion. And you've got these people who are talking to you like this. I think the only advice I would give is just respectfully ask them, you know, put to them that you don't really want to talk about religion at work. You don't think it's the best place to do it. And, you know, you might be happy to have these conversations if you are indeed happy to have these conversations outside of work. But, you know, you don't want it to affect your work balance, if you like. You think it might impede your ability to do your job if you've got this on your mind as well. And you know, it's a very difficult situation you're in. But I think that is where I would start if I was in that position. I was uncomfortable with having these conversations. I would kind of just say I'm not comfortable. I'm not comfortable with this.
Well, that's where I would go too, because I mean, this is a professionalism issue, and if I mean, I kind of think that, of course, like these things should start at the lowest level possible before escalating. So like my advice would be to bring it up, like Richard is saying, like, hey, I don't think this is appropriate work conversation. Like, I want to respect you as a person, and I would like to be respected as a person. And I understand that we have differences in our belief system, but I think that, like, in order to keep a good work relationship, we need to keep that to the side while we're at work and just have a professional work relationship. And like, and especially if it's a boss versus an employee thing, that gets a little weird too, because somebody has more authority in this than the other person. And it could be actually, like, depending on how this went down, like this could be grounds to report like religious discrimination at work, like depending on how this was going on. Like if you feel like you're being targeted and your boss is like taking out certain things on you, like it might be worth, like if this keeps getting out of hand, going to HR or something where you can report something like this. Because like, as much as I like debating religion on this show, like I don't talk about like religion at work for all of these reasons. I think it just gets too sticky. So, I mean, that's where I would go with it. I don't really see this as being work appropriate.
So a few things I've been wanting to interject on. One, we usually don't have an issue with talking about this stuff at work. You know, we tend to be pretty relaxed about it. But the thing that was like kind of like what's really fractured for me is just this, where he got to the point where it's just like, my beliefs are inherently superior to yours. That's kind of where it kind of like just. And he's not a bad guy. I mean, he still gives me the same raise as he does everyone else every time it comes up. So he's not. I don't think he's targeting me for anything. But
I mean, either way, it sounds like
a little. So one thing that's also a little. I've never really. That's a little disconcerting is when he. Also, when I asked him like, what is your proof that your beliefs are the right one, and he said the fact that I haven't fired you yet. But I think he said that in the heat of the moment kind of thing.
I think even if you've had some good conversations in the past, I think especially after this has happened, you need a boundary here. Like, and as much as I love these discussions, like this just sounds like this is a recipe for disaster, especially in the workplace. Like, I think you need to set up a hard boundary and say, we are not going to talk about this at work. Like, I think that's the best way forward in all this, and I think Richard agrees.
Yeah, I'd agree with that, and I think that it's not surprising finding a Christian that thinks that they've got a superior kind of system of belief. I don't think it's surprising in any religion, even if you kind of come down to the like normally kind of nicer religions, the more friendly religions like Buddhism and stuff. They still think they're right at the end of the day. They still believe that they're right and you're wrong. So, I think that's just inherent with having a belief.
So another aspect that I just thought of that may be relevant to this is because how I used to be in that same position of what he believes, but I was kind of a bit of a Christian supremacist, and it's kind of like a sore spot for me thinking back on that period as well, I guess.
So that's even better of a reason to put a boundary there and not talk about this at work. And that's kind of my position's really not going to push on that. Like
the Christian supremacist.
I mean, and it's up to you what you're going to do. My position really isn't budging here. Like I don't think these arguments necessarily need to happen in the workplace, especially if you're having fights over them at work. And with that, I think we're at the end of the show, so I'm going to let you go, but because we have one more call that I want to take. All right, wrapping up the show. Here we have Katrina, pronouns her, she, her, from Canada, wants to talk about, is believing in God a delusion? And is there a benefit to the delusion? Katrina, you are on Talk Heathen. What's your question?
Hi, thanks for having me. I want to posit that there's a placebo benefit to prayer. we see placebo benefits in the medical, and I'm glad that Dr. Ben, that you're here and we can talk about this, but we see a lot of benefits to placebos all around with our experiences, and I think that there is one to prayer as well. I am an atheist. I think that God is a delusion, and prayers are the songs of delusion, but I still think it can be helpful to that individual who's praying.
So here's my pushback, and it's the same pushback I had earlier in the call, and it's that if you believe this, and whether it's a placebo or not, if you believe it and you start using that and not receiving care that you need, that's a problem. And so, like, and the thing with the placebo, in order for the placebo effect to work, you need to believe that it works. So that's where we have the issue. And we have a very big ethical issue with using placebo for people because of that. Like, are you consenting to not getting actual treatment? And then if you are choosing prayer over this other thing, that can be more harmful. So that's kind of my biggest concern with that.
There is tons of evidence that placebos do work, though, right? Even if you believe the placebo
to an extent
works, or if you believe that it is real.
But hold on, placebos can only work to an extent and for certain things. Like, you can't use a placebo to like cure cancer. You can't use a placebo to treat a broken bone. You can't use a placebo to give you a blood transfusion. And the problem is you have people that will forego these other treatments because they believe prayer works. And even if it gives you some benefit of psychological, like if you have neural stimulation to a point where you're getting neurotransmitter release and you are getting some certain benefits, those still are not going to outweigh the harm of foregoing these other things, right?
Yeah. Like, is there really absolutely no evidence that placebo effects can heal bones, broken bones?
There is no, think about the mechanism, right? Everything comes down to a biological or biochemical mechanism, right? What's the mechanism required to heal bones?
So I'm not sure I don't know enough about it, but I imagine
right.
regenerating your like your biomatter, right? Like your bones are regenerating and reconnecting. No?
Well, so there are very specific cell types that work on bones. You have osteoblasts that build bone, and you have osteoclasts that break down bone. And there's this fun little cycle of bone rebuilding and bone like resorption. And there's a whole process with cartilage formation and et cetera. And there's a lot of, number one, ingredients that need to be present for this to happen. You have cells that need to be present for this to happen. And like, all of this, and a lot of times when people relate to certain healing, I think there's a disconnect in what people think of healing is and what it actually is. And there's very specific mechanisms that have to be in place. And sure, there are some mechanisms that the placebo effect can have an impact on, largely with serotonin and dopamine release, probably with catecholamine release. And like, all of that is great. But is that mechanism the same mechanism that is necessary to heal bone? No. They're not. These mechanisms do not overlap. So it's like we can think of healing as this broad, vague thing, but that's not what it is. There's very specific physical components that need to be present. And so like certain aspects of recovery rely on catecholamine release. So that's where we see some of this improvement. But in other things, you're not going to see that benefit because the mechanisms are incompatible.
So then could prayer be helpful for placebo effects to a limited degree? Like if there were, if we had danger zone for prayers and then positive areas for prayers, like do you see the benefits of that?
I can see some minimal benefit, but again, like the problem is that you have to believe that it works in order for it to work, like as a placebo. And you have the people that are pushing prayer on people are from these religious organizations that believe sincerely that prayer can cure cancer and that can heal broken bones and that can do all these things. And so if you have that belief that is then required for the placebo effect to work, now you're taking on this baggage of having people that are susceptible to not understanding the science believing that they can pray and not need chemotherapy. Like, and my own family are very religious, very anti-vax, very anti-chemo and things. And I've had family members pass away from cancer and like from going through all of these more alternative methods because they strongly believed in them. And it's very, very disheartening. Like if you have like children that are going without blood transfusion stuff because these people strongly believe that like if their God wants to save their kid, then they're going to. And like, yeah, you might get some minimal benefit of like, again, more of those psychological effects that are going to help chemically, minimally, but there's a point where you can only compensate so much. And that's kind of what we're getting at too. Like the mechanism of compensation is very complex, and you'll see people start to do very well initially, and then they'll just absolutely tank. And I've seen this as well in hospital settings where we had somebody who ate a medicinal plant in his backyard. He is from El Salvador, and it's a medicinal plant that grows. It's a like medicinal there, and people would use it. And he ate some in his backyard in the U.S. And we thought he was doing fine. First, we're like, okay, he's got some kidney damage. We'll put him on dialysis, and then like his liver enzymes like went down, and we're like, okay, it looks like he's going back to normal. No, his liver enzymes went down because he wasn't compensating anymore. His liver had stopped working. They should have been high, and we should have seen evidence of his liver like responding to this, but it wasn't because he just wasn't responding at all anymore. And so you'll see like, oh, this person looks like they're recovering. They're actually not. So I think like there's a disconnect here with like what is actually happening on a physical level versus like what is the limited benefit of the placebo. And I can see where you're coming from, where like, yeah, there might be some helpful things from this, but the disconnect, I think, matters enough to where the risk is not worth the benefit. And that's where I'm coming from.
Mm-hmm. I hear you. It's a challenge. I personally don't pray, but I know a lot of people who do. I was raised Roman Catholic. My family is very religious. So I see the peace, the calm that they get from this process, from the method. Like it's meaningful to them, and I can see the benefit personally. I also can't buy into it. Like
so, this is sometimes I wish religious. Latrina, that's one aspect of religious belief where they might be getting a minimal amount of benefit, which incidentally they could probably get elsewhere by doing other kind of relaxation practices, which don't rely on the faith. The problem is that that prayer isn't in isolation to religious belief, and that's a whole set of things that informs the way people live, the way people vote, the way people interact with others. And just having, even if we're entirely kind of kind and just say, yes, absolutely, praying gives you some minimal feeling of ease within yourself. It makes you feel a little bit better. That does not override all the other aspects of religious belief. Even on the most basic level, if it's a religious believer who accepts science and all that, then they're not likely to kind of use prayer to heal, even if it's like just they accept medicine and all the other things like that. Even at the most basic level, there is some cognitive dissonance which is going to have to occur because they believe in something without good reason, and that leaves them susceptible to other forms of kind of trickery, con men and things like that, where they will be more susceptible to falling prey to things like that. That small amount of benefit taken from prayer is not going to override all of those other aspects of that religious belief.
It's not worth it. Yeah, I see your point. I also see a lot of harm that comes out of it. A lot of damage, a lot of manipulation, and there's a lot of unspoken rules, and when they're broken, people are shunned. Like, there's a lot of problems with religion. I 100% agree. That's why I don't prescribe to it. But Yeah, I see your point. Makes sense.
Well, and something with that, like, and I think maybe you and I could get on a similar page with, I do encourage certain things to put people in kind of that same mindset that maybe you're talking about with placebo. Like, I do encourage meditation, relaxation techniques. Like, I do value like mindset training for certain things. Like, I value therapy, like lots of ways that can give people kind of that psychological edge maybe that they need to help them. Like, maybe that small benefit that you would get from prayer, you can also get from these other things. And so I think that there are ways that you can kind of get the same effect without having to rely on religion. And so I think that's kind of the approach that I would take with it.
That's a good point too, though, because like religion has provided this kind of one-stop shop for people to get all like these core needs met, right? Like community, ritual and routine and meditation. There's a lot of things that they get from it. So I see why it exists and why it's hard for people to break away from. Because outside of religion, we don't have those one-stop shop that meet all of the needs in one bucket, right? In one experience or one community. Or I haven't experienced that. I haven't witnessed that outside of religion.
Well, hopefully you can join our community, because I think we do a decent job here, at least, for giving that kind of community. And you might agree or might disagree. You might walk into this community and be like, oh, wow, I don't like these people. That's totally fine. Like, you're allowed to find whatever community. But I do think that we do a good job here. And I think, like, you're welcome to go to these Facebook groups that we have, our Discord group, all of that. And hopefully you can find some other people to have these kind of conversations with and have this kind of more one-stop shop. And even if you can't find a community that's like meeting all of your needs at the same time, hopefully you can have several small communities. I know I have kind of different groups within the LGBT community. I have kind of one bucket for that, and I got another bucket for like the atheist community and all that. So like, you can have multiple communities, and that's totally fine too.
Yeah. Well, thank you. I appreciate the invite.
Yeah.
And
thanks for calling
your opinions on this and your input. You're welcome.
Yeah. Thanks for calling in. We're going to wrap up the show, but thank you to everybody that has called in today. We've had some really fun and interesting conversations. But have you ever said to yourself that you really love what the ACA creates, just like this lovely community here that we were just talking about, but you want a way that you can watch it all of the time, which, like, I don't know why you'd want to watch Richard and my face all the time, but that's okay, because you can watch other people all the time on this channel, as we got you covered. We got 2 24/7 live streams. AXP TV delivers a constant stream of shows, clips, and specials from over the 26 seasons of the Atheist Experience. And now Heathen TV provides you with clips from Talk Heathen. Watch or simply listen to your favorite host and discover some hosts that you've never heard of. You can go to tiny.cc/AXPTV and tiny.cc/Heathen TV to join in on the fun. And just a reminder that the prompt for this week is, what flyer would you not expect to see on a church bulletin board? Reply in the comments and tune in at the beginning of next week's episode to hear the top 3 answers. And if you like what you see and you want to support the channel, please, even if you can't financially contribute, you can always like the video and subscribe to the channel. Put some comments down below, and that is a great way to help us out. You have no idea how much even those little steps can help boost our visibility to the community and get some more callers in. So like the video and subscribe, become a member. Click the join button below the video. And if you want to be listed as one of the top 5 patrons of the week, you can go to tiny.cc/PatreonTH. We also have a channel that houses all of the shows in ACA audio podcast form. Visit tiny.cc/AEN podcast. You can become part of the Talk Heathen community in our fan-run Facebook page at tiny.cc/FBTHG. And if you'd like to continue the discussion after the show, join us in ACD, our fan-run Discord server at tiny.cc/ACDDiscord. And we do have another super chat that I wanted to read as well from Dash. We have $4. It says, pear. Oh, it's a sticker. And it was a little pear character exaggeratedly stretching its arm forward to offer a cup of coffee. I love that little caption there. That is very, that's very entertaining to read. But I guess Dash is offering us a cup of coffee from a very enthusiastic pear. So thank you. Thank you for that sticker. Love to see that. I kind of want to submit more stickers now just so that I can get the description read out on the stream, because that's really funny. And there are some people here that work very, very hard behind the scenes pretty much every single day of the week. So let's go to the crew cam. We appreciate you. Everybody in the crew, say hello. Thank you for helping us out every week and letting us just be the talking heads that show up on Sundays, and then peace out the rest of the time. You matter a whole lot to the efforts, and we could not do it without you. Let's throw out some love rings to our lovely viewers. Whether or not you believe, if you are an essential worker, we want to thank you. I know Richard just got a new job recently, but Richard, you're an essential worker. Thank you for being an essential worker. Thank you, everyone in the audience. If you're stocking shelves, if you're delivering mail, if you're working at a department store, if you're working anywhere that helps out your community, you are an essential worker, and we're very thankful that you're putting in your efforts for the community. And if you don't believe, like we were saying to the last caller, this is your place. Like, we may not have a church with our fancy placebo effects, but we do have people, we have discussions, and hopefully we can be a good place for you to find that community that you may be missing without that religious background. And if you do believe, we don't hate you.
We're just not convinced in it, Gov.
Bye, everyone.
We want the truth, so watch Truth Wanted live Friday at 7 p.m. Central. Visit tiny.cc/YTTW and call into the show at 512-991-9242, or connect to the show online at tiny.cc/calltw.